A very warm welcome to all of you for being here with us this morning and second week of a very, very busy March. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of Voice and Data and Cyber Media. Many of you have been part of this journey that we have been undertaking for the last 15 years. This is the 15th year of the Telecom conference, annual Telecom conference and awards that we have been doing. And the idea, as I have often repeated, the idea is basically to create a platform where all the stakeholders come together for deliberations and discussions, and more importantly for catching up and networking. We have a very, very packed agenda today, starting with a bird's eye view of what happened in the last 12 months and what's likely to be the impact of that in the days to come. And that session is being taken by none other than Mr. Vikram Tivatia, a very popular person of the Telecom fraternity. That would be followed by the chief guest address. Mr. Arish Sharma is the chief guest this morning, the DRI chairperson. Then we have a CEO panel where we are going to talk about what is the journey from a traditional telecom service provider to a digital service provider, and what are the challenges, and what would be some of the big things that we are likely to see from happening in the industry. And for that panel we have besides Mr. Himanshu Kapania, we have Mr. Anupam Srivastava from BSNL, and we have Mr. Sanjay Savchenko from MPS, and we have Mr. Sharad Mehrotra from
the telecom sector. So the growth story, or the story of the last 20 years, the way it's impacted the nation and each individual, all of us know it's very significant. But how is it going to pan out? Let's say at least 2016, we are already 3 months down, or going forward at least for the next 3-4 years. Because it's not just 1 year, but 3-4 years where you start something and you know the way it goes up. As we plan for the data growth, so to say. So the real good news is that, of course, amongst the various economies, India's economy is kind of looking brighter than most economies. Of course, there is an impact on investments from overseas, but of course, it is one of the brighter areas for investments, the overall economy, and within that, the government's Digital India program is something which has brought a lot of synergy, because earlier what used to happen was it used to be at the central level, but what we are seeing is that many states helping out the telecom sector is getting focus from state level agencies and municipalities when you factor in the smart city part and all that, because whatever has to happen, all the services that have to be delivered will intrinsically rely very heavily on the telecom networks and the broadband networks. So that is the good news, and we are seeing in terms of policy wise in the last year, many states did come out with their mobile tower policies. Some are friendly, many are not friendly, but the good news is that the DoT is reaching out to states saying that for a variety of to see the sector as the golden goose. So that is something where one has to keep our eye on as to how much of financial stress is there in the sector, and what are the policy measures that we will undertake to overcome and alleviate that stress. Because obviously investors would be looking at that part as to what are the policy measures that are being taken by the government to make sure that this part of Digital India or the networks which have to support that, whether the policies are there in place. As you know, the 250,000 panchayat thing, you know, in golf what we say is it's good to take a shot, take a nice shot, but where the ball will actually land depends a lot on the follow through. So yes, a target was announced of 250,000, but the follow through wasn't good enough. So the ball went into a rough patch and it's not yet getting out so soon. Many of you would know there's been no, you know, CEO of the USO fund for quite some time now. Now, you know, without a head driving such an important agenda of the government, obviously that requires immediate correction. So that is, you know, one thing that all of us are looking at, because the fiber density is really not up there, and that really needs to be enhanced. Another thing that I'd like to, a piece of good news in the last year is we were at the WRC, that's the World Radio Conference. It takes place every 4 years. The last one was in November last. So all telcos around the world were competing with other sectors like broadcasting and space to get additional spectrum for IMT services. So the good news is additional new bands for IMT services have been identified, and India supported up to 400 megahertz of new spectrum to be identified. So that is good news for the country, that about 15-16 megahertz in India per operator versus maybe 50 megahertz per operator overseas. So you see the area in which we have to operate in terms of the pipes or the highways, you know, the government wants to call it highways. So those highways can only come up if you have bigger natural resource, and it's a no-brainer that any spectrum lying idle in the cupboard is actually a gross national waste. So if you have the spectrum, it's not being used, let's put it to use. So a good traction that's happening is in license shared access. So where, you know, defense maybe, or the railways, or the primary agencies which hold the spectrum or is assigned to them but are not using it. So in many countries, having realized this, you can give it in a license shared access mode, wherein the spectrum can be used, and in case of an emergency requirement by the primary agencies, it can be reverted to them. So that's something which is gaining you know, attention within the DoT as well, and we hope some policy announcements around that will take place. Now let me just put, you know, what are the targets? So you've got like 600 million broadband at 2020. Where do we stand? At 115 million. And that too at 512 speeds. So what that implies is you have to add at least 8 million subscribers per month. Broadband subscribers. Is it happening? Obviously, it's not happening. So in terms of policy measures, what is it that we have to take in terms of policy measures to make sure and accelerate the growth of broadband, and primarily which will be on wireless networks? So how do you attract the investments into the wireless networks is one big area. The other thing is about the 250,000 villages. Where do we stand? The target today is you'll have to add about 7,000 villages each month to achieve that by 2017, which is the target. Now imagine the wherewithal required. What we are given to understand is all the optical fiber laying agencies, they already, you know, committed in laying the national, the defense fiber or the network for spectrum. So physical hands and abilities to actually lay fiber for the Bharat net is also an area which will require attention, because you actually don't have the hands on deck to actually lay out that fiber, besides an agency wanting to participate with the USO fund to actually lay it out. The third thing is about smart cities. So while smart cities have been identified, 20 on a fast track have been notified, but what we are seeing is actual measures to commence work in those 20 leading to the 100, and those states actually participating. So given the timelines, that work has to be done at a rapid clip. One of the things that we are good in India is you announce the target and then the follow through, as I said earlier, that follow through is extremely important for the target to be achieved. So that is something that will require all our attention in the years that going ahead. Now, on the LTE part, I really want to highlight that. So the good news is today, as we speak, we have about 160,000 LTE base stations, which is about maybe 15% of the total number of base stations in the country. So there are about 11 lakh, and in the last 1 or 2 years, we've seen a rollout of 160,000 4G base stations. So the good news is that LTE is really going to start growing at a rapid clip, and the wireless broadband piece, that again is set to grow in a significant way in the year ahead. The other good news, and the way we think networks and services will expand, as many of you know, the RBI has given the licenses for the payment bank licenses. Now many of the telcos are already there, and that's a new area of revenue and transactions that we see will find a lot of attention. You know, we all really like the Oyo rooms and the Airbnb and Uber and Ola, because the e-commerce, because all of these rely on networks to deliver services, and they are transformational in nature. So that is something that, you know, AT&T has tied up with all the smart car manufacturers, so to say, because a smart car with multiple sensors and a lot of M2M and connectivity requirements actually drives traffic to the network. So while in India we may be a little away, but the good news is all these companies are looking at India, whether it's the Loon project or the other project to use Wi-Fi or the solar planes.
Thank you, Mr. Goyal, and thank you, Mr. Tewatia. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us this morning our chief guest, who doesn't need any introduction, Mr. R.S. Sharma, the telecom regulator. What I will just say here is that perhaps he is the most apt and the right person today for this job, because of the fact that he is not just a bureaucrat, but he is also a technologist. We have been interacting with him for the last more than a decade, I think, and the kind of things that he was doing in the area of e-governance and mobile governance earlier, and now that he is at the helm of the telecom regulatory body, I think that's the kind of person that we needed. And as Vikram mentioned about the synergies, I think he would be the person who can really build the synergies that we are all waiting for and looking for. So without really any ado, I would like to invite Mr. Sharma to kindly deliver his chief guest address. And can I also request Mr. R.K. Upadhyay, former CMD of BSNL, to present a small bouquet on behalf of Voice and Data to our chief guest. Mr. R.S. Sharma, please.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim ji. Good morning to all of you, my friends. I see many faces which are so familiar, and we keep on talking and discussing. Honestly, I have not prepared anything for today morning's sort of a speech, as suddenly in the morning my PPS informed me that today you have this date at 10 in the morning, and I really didn't know. So I am here absolutely raw, and maybe my thoughts may not be very coherent to begin with. So with that, let me start. The recent experience which we have had is many of us had gone there to Mobile World Congress. And the Mobile World Congress, there are a couple of things which were very, very overpowering in the sense that you heard them again and again and again. In any pandal, as we say, or in our language, we went, we found they were all talking of 5G. They were all talking of cloud. They were all talking of Internet of Things. So these were the buzzwords and maybe a couple of other words. But people, when they talked of 4G and LTE and those kinds of technologies, they were talking as if they are mentioning some obsolete or something which is nearing obsolescence. That is the language they were talking about. They said, yeah, in 4G, the latency is not really worthwhile. You know, once you start doing all kinds of robotics and remote things, latency or maybe auto cars and things of that sort, latency has become important. And therefore, 4G is not really suitable for those kinds of things. Rajan was also there with us. So actually, you know, one felt when you talk of year of 4G, you know, one is having that sense after attending the Mobile World Congress and what is happening in the technology space everywhere, one feels that we are quite behind. And for us, 4G itself is a big thing which is coming and coming since last maybe I don't know how many months. And we hear and somebody tells me that, okay, we have this something called 4G, it says LTE, but when you try to connect something, it doesn't work. इसको हटा नीचे से डिब्बा रखा है. Thank you. So basically what I'm saying is that as far as technology is concerned, technologies are available and they are being made available at a very fast pace. Change is taking place very fast. Unfortunately, we in our country, for various reasons, we are, as Vikram just now read out, at the broadband availability level, we are pretty low. In terms of the users of the internet, the last 4 billion which are left out, 1 billion are here in India. So there are pretty, you know, sort of depressing statistics which we face. And I think we all need to work together, and you use the word synergy. We all need to work together in a synergistic manner to ensure that people of our country get the things which they deserve in area and space of technology. We don't need to say that internet has become one of the biggest enablers of development, of change. And if we want to leverage that, one of the essential prerequisites for that is having connectivity of the data connectivity of not of 512 kbps, because nobody talks in terms of Ks now. Everybody talks in Ms and Gs, megabytes and gigabytes. And therefore I think we need to really leapfrog. We do have certain constraints. For example, one of the biggest constraints we have is the lack of fixed lines, lack of wire lines. We hardly have less than 20 million wire lines in this country, and many of them are still going away, so to say. These could become a very effective instruments of providing broadband to the people of our country. Unfortunately, that did not exist. So what has happened is that mobile has become the primary means of accessing broadband in the country. And there are, of course, technologies with realities, and we need to continuously work to ensure that the sort of things improve. While announcing Digital India, the government has made it very clear its vision of ensuring that we propose that we want India to become a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy in a foreseeable future. But for that to happen, many things will need to be done, and everyone will have to work in a sense of coherence to make that happen. And one of the essential things is broadband connectivity. Broadband as a utility to citizens is the first pillar of all the vision areas. Out of 9, some of the concepts which can ensure maximum utilization of the network of the spectrum, we need to explore them. We need to explore them. Probably spectrum sharing and trading is another, one of the steps in that direction to ensure better utilization of the available network, harmonization. So I think because spectrum is a perishable resource, perishable natural resource, we need to ensure and that somehow that is non-accumulatable, which means I can't sort of accumulate the unused spectrum and use it tomorrow. We can't do that. And therefore there is a need to evolve policies and methods and technologies and leverage them to facilitate optimal utilization of this natural resource. So that is something in which we are working, and it is still in a very, very preliminary stage, but we are sort of considering the idea as to what other things can be done so that the existing spectrum, and not necessarily the ones which is held by telecom companies, but also otherwise, if it can be used without causing any kind of compromises of the existing users, we should actually think of possibilities of using that kind of thing. White spaces is another area in which is at the experimental stage as yet, but that is something which again also can be sort of leveraged and explored. Then of course satellite communication. My thought to you today morning is that India should explore all the possibilities of providing connectivity to its people in a big way, so that we are really able to leverage the tremendous power and potential which the internet and the data and the connectivity has to offer to its citizens, and we will continue to work towards that aim. Of course, the other areas where we need to work on and where we have done a great amount of work actually, and many countries are grappling with those situations, is the area of what you must have seen in the last year's budget, JAM Trinity, Janadhan, Aadhaar and mobile, and these are, I call them not the hard infrastructure but the soft infrastructure. Providing financial inclusion is actually empowering a person to participate in this digital world, because there are many situations like e-commerce and like other kinds of things where a person will need to have a financial address so that he can actually do this. Wi-Fi hotspot in public places, if you want to make them really viable and sustainable in the long run, probably one will have to evolve some seamless, easy payment models where, because all the university degrees, certificates, everything will become digital and shareable and digitally signed. So that is another beautiful piece of product which India has created, which no other country has done. Digital locker, e-sign. Then the National Payment Corporation of India has come up with what is called Unified Payment Interface, which essentially makes financial transactions as easy as making a phone call. I want to transfer 100 rupees to Rajan. I just, I make a phone call to him, I just put Rajan and then they transfer 100 rupees. And it should happen, and it should happen seamlessly without compromising your security. That is the most important part of it. Of course, there are many methods in which you can do transactions, but they may not be as secure or as robust or as scalable. So therefore, India is in a very unique position to have paperless governance, to have presenceless governance, and to have a governance which is really authenticated governance, and you are able to have large amount of transactions. So we have built a whole technology stack, which some people call India stack, which has been developed. What is required, however, is the 4G connectivity, the robust connectivity which every one of our countrymen should have access to. And that, I think, with all of us, as Vikram said, with the help of, with the kind of coordinated working of the industry, of the regulator, of the government, and all other partners of the ecosystem, because let's not forget that there are many other partners in this ecosystem. We are not the only three. So everybody else working together, we should be able to realize the digital India dream of this thing of the country, and this is really so essential, because then and only then India will be able to transform itself into a digitally empowered society and a knowledge economy. Thank you very much.
Can I request Mr. Rajan Matthews to please present a small memento of appreciation to the chief guest? Well, as I said right at the beginning, here is a person who perhaps is the best suited to talk about and actually deliver convergence. So I think if you noticed, his speech had a lot of telecom, but also a lot of IT and e-governance. So I think that's what is going to take the thing forward. Thank you so much, and I would now like to, thanks a lot.
I'd like to take your leave because I have a meeting at 11. So.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot. Maybe a cup of coffee as you are going out, sir. I would now like to invite to talk about a very, very interesting session which is on basically monetizing LTE, lessons from around the world. And I would like to invite on stage Mr. Lechu Narayanan, Vice President South Asia for CSG, to talk to us. Mr. Narayanan.
The 6 lessons that we have learned, or key lessons that we have learned over the years working with a number of different service providers around the world. As service providers continue to invest in 4G LTE, the focus has primarily been around network rollout. And there's a substantial investment that's going in behind the LTE network rollout. But the question is, how do you monetize this? Where do you generate your revenue? Where do you generate your money from this large cap of investment that's going into this? We have been working with a number of service providers over the years in terms of trying to help them understand in terms of, well, while you focus on the network rollout, at the same time, look at options and mechanics in which you can drive the monetization of this large investment. And what we believe today is India is in a position where they could learn from the experience of other operators around the world and essentially understand some of the mistakes that have been made and potentially leapfrog with a view to monetizing these assets a lot better. So India is uniquely positioned with respect to monetizing this large investment. We recently published a white paper on the subject, essentially covering this topic. And then you have Tree Macau in Macau, which is one of our existing customers who have recently launched their LTE services. What they are trying to do is they are bundling voice, data, and SMS, and they've taken it a step further by extending the coverage with capped packs when the subscriber goes and roams in Hong Kong. So essentially the same data pack extends into Hong Kong as well. So these are some examples of how service providers are thinking of ideas and means in which they could innovate and monetize their LTE asset. The fourth lesson is looking at offering premium services. Yeah. So you have the example of Optus in Australia. What Optus has discovered is over a period of time, they are proactively looking at transitioning their subscribers onto the LTE network. What they believe is the speed of the network and the experience, the user experience to be had will increase the stickiness from a subscriber point of view. And they've taken that a step further by looking at tying up with, say, Cricket Australia to provide a live pass so wherein you can watch cricket broadcasts on your devices. And they've also recently got the exclusive rights for the broadcast of Premier League, English Premier League. So what they're banking on is by, one, increasing the stickiness and leveraging on the speed of the network, they can bring out some premium service offering which a percentage of the subscriber base would appeal to, and thereby allow them to monetize and increase their revenue stream. The fifth is charging for quality. Now, While this may not be entirely applicable everywhere, it's just another way in which operators of speed, they could attract a pool of consumer to the services in their device. From a local point of view, you have Aircel, who also have a very similar plan based on speed. Now, the challenge from an Aircel point of view is today, it's an unlimited plan is what they're offering. So if you go back to the previous slide, lesson number 2, our belief is you should not be offering unlimited plans. Cap plans, tiered plans allows you to monetize your revenue a lot better than an unlimited plan.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Narayanan, especially at a time when one big operator is coming up with its services. I think there's a lot of interest on LTE, and I'm sure this will play its role in catalyzing Indian telecom. I would like to request Mr. S.D. Saxena, former Director of Finance with BSNL, to present a small memento of our appreciation to Mr. Narayanan. Before we break for tea, I would like to announce that the next one is the CEO panel, which will basically talk about what are the big things which are likely to happen in 2016-17. The CEO panel will talk about what are some of the big things that are likely to happen in the next year, and the panelists include Mr. Himanshu Kapania, MD of Idea Cellular, Mr. Sergey Savchenko, MD of MTS India, Mr. Sharad Mehrotra, CEO of Telenor, Mr. Sanjay Kaul, MD Service Provider Business with Cisco, and Mr. Pradeep Gupta. So with that, I would like to invite all of you for tea outside, tea and coffee, but please try and be back in the hall within the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you so much once again, and look forward to meeting you for the very, very exciting next session, which is the CEO panel. Thank you, and look forward to have you with us in the hall again in the next 10 minutes. Thanks a lot. There's also a stall outside in the next phase. Just for your information, the CEO panel discussion that we have basically talks about the big things that will happen in 2016-17. And for the discussions, we have Mr. Himanshu Kapania, MD Idea Cellular, Mr. Sergey Savchenko, CEO of MTS India, Mr. Sharad Mehrotra, CEO of Telenor, Mr. Sanjay Kaul, MD of the Service Provider Business at Cisco, and Mr. Pradeep Gupta. Can I request the video to be played for a few minutes as the delegates move back into the hall?
So earlier we had dumb cities, now we have smart cities. We were earlier senseless society, now we are a sensor society.
Now you are talking for it. Maybe it's something. Just on this, Barcelona this time demonstrated can't believe it in the process of going just the wireless. Just flash something like they've got 3,500 use cases for machines, and they're live cases it's happening, and it's going to go very fast in India, and I think there's a lot of monetization to be made if we play it right.
Okay, Sanjay, let's talk about the money. you said you like that area, right? So, users are also now demanding, very flexible packages, bundled stuff at one end, time flexibility, traffic flexibility, different kind of combinations and so on. What do you see is the evolution that is going to take place there, and how do companies in terms of this sort of variable user experience and great actually mobile broadband subscribers. And we also know there are some like smaller, some like bundle with unlimited. What really I'm thinking about is we know how to do for the traditional telco services. But do you know how to do it for new services? That's what I would like to add to this platform infrastructure. We have great experience, and OEMs also will get a lot of hundreds of services and capabilities. But do we know in this new business model how to sell those services? Not very much. So for instance, end-to-end and so on, we don't know how to. We don't know because again, so when we come back to my other